this is all about relationships. And I wrote a book called The Soul's Coach, 7 Paths to Healing Your Relationships. Probably because of my own experience, which hasn't been so great. It's been good for many, many years. But when you go through things, I think real life, and then you go and study, which always helps, it helps you help others because you can relate to it. So this is all about, I think some of us don't have good relationships, whether it's with our husbands, with a boyfriend, with a child, money, health. So whatever I'm speaking about, and even my book that's been written pretty much on romantic relationships, but it's really about any kind of relationship. You have to have a relationship with yourself first, as you all know, than you do with anyone else. So what I've noticed is in relationships, typically, that we all tend to blame everybody else instead of saying, I'm upset because I, right? And is anyone here married? I want to see who I'm talking to. Okay, so everyone's pretty much right. Is anyone dating somebody? Okay. Does anyone ever wonder why your children drive you crazy? Me too. Okay. That one is a good one. Oh, I could talk about that one. Oh boy, no judgments there. So whenever we have issues with somebody else, it's really important to say, I'm upset because from the Buddhist perspective, we control the way we think, and we've been given that right. So anytime that you're upset, I'm going to ask you to say, okay, I know that they're doing something, but instead of pointing the finger and playing the blame game, no matter what they're doing, you're going to sit back and say to yourself, I wonder why I'm upset. And then you would have compassion for the other person's experience. Does that make sense? The other thing is that whatever we do, if we have children, our children are sponges. And we adults are what we learned as children. That's how the mind works. And I practice hypnotherapy because I work with the subconscious mind and spiritual psychology, which is raising your consciousness and the study of the mind. So when I talk to people for a few minutes, I can usually tell what it was like when they grew up. And what people don't understand, and they do now a little bit more than they used to, but whatever your parents were taught, they have taught you, and you are doing the same thing, and there's typically a pattern. So one of your greatest mirrors is your child and your relationship. Because whatever you see that you don't like, you've got to really sit back and say, wow, what did I do? And just a little interesting story. My daughter's 19, she's wonderful. But there are some things that happen that I'm not happy about. And I noticed myself saying, well, why would you do this? Why are you speaking to me in this way? But what I had to do was stop and say, wait a minute, this is my responsibility. What did I do to teach her to become who she is today? And I'm going to say she's a wonderful child. I'm lucky, because I know it's not always so easy. But there have been some things that have come up, and it's my doing, right? Same thing with money. A lot of us grow up thinking that it's really hard to make money. You can't make any money. You don't deserve money. People that make a lot of money are bad people. I could go on and on and on. So you have to think, where did you learn that? Right? And unfortunately, that happens a lot with everything. We often take our past and we project it into the future. And what we want to understand is that our past does not define who we are now. I don't care what kind of history you've had in your lifetime. I specialize in trauma, so I deal with a lot of trauma. It has nothing to do with who you were. What it matters in who you are now, because we can change anything we want in life. Does anyone here know about Viktor Frankl? Oh, yes. So Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist. He was Jewish. And he was captured, he and his whole family, and they lived in the concentration camps. And his whole family were murdered. And he was in for 3 months. And this man, the book is called Man's Search for Meaning, and he created logotherapy, which is where you understand the suffering there's a meaning behind your suffering, and it gives you strength. He survived the Holocaust against all odds, because he was in some very difficult situations, because he refused to allow himself to be controlled by these people. You can take anything away from me, but you can't control my mind. And I write in my book about this. He I don't remember the exact story, but he's walking in the snow, because back then people unfortunately didn't have shoes, they just had a shirt on their back. And they were marching to their death. And no, he did not die, he lived, and the story goes on, and it's wonderful. But instead of choosing to freeze and be scared because he was going to die, he thought about his wife and the happiness that he shared with his wife. And I know this is true. I mean, you can choose the way you think. Recently, I'm in my 20-month of recovery, thank goodness. I had a ruptured brain aneurysm in the cerebellum, which is very rare, and I almost died. And my daughter found me in the bathroom floor, and thank God she saved my life. 2 weeks prior to that, I was in my daughter's room. She was upset about something, and I was laying down next to her. Late at night, she should be sleeping. And the symptoms of the really bad headache and the nausea, but my whole right side went numb. So I was having a stroke, which is from the bleeding. And it's very strange, because I've had to think, why did I not call 911, which is probably not a smart thing to do. But what I've realized, I call it mother's love, because I didn't for once think about me. What I was thinking about is I have to save my child. I cannot die in her bed because that's not a good idea, and she needs me. And I remember going up, I now truly believe this because I've experienced it. I went up and I had to pull myself down as hard as I possibly could. I'll never forget the fight of it, and stay in my body. I lived for 2 weeks, which shouldn't have even been 24 hours. And then she found me on the bathroom floor, and I've had to learn to walk again. And talk about, I thought I'd learned all my lessons, but fat chance. I really did. But I had to learn to change the way I think. Instead of being miserable, which could take 5 years for me to get better, I just found out 2 days ago. I'm dizzy, and it's hard to walk, and sick to my stomach a lot. But I had to change my thoughts. Am I going to stay here and really be sick and be miserable, or am I going to fight? And here I am today, doing what I do. So I really understand the power of thought, whether it's depression or health or whatever you're thinking about. We really can choose. Even if you're laying on a hospital bed wondering if you're ever going to walk again, you can choose to trust in spirit and know that for my highest good or better for all those concerned, and whatever lesson that I'm supposed to be learning, I'm not going to judge it as right or wrong. I'm going to accept it and make it okay. And those words right there, if you can hold on to, will change your life. And you're really speaking to someone that just wasn't sure what was going to happen. And I'm sure some of you went through things or know people. But it was really, really scary. Your outer reality is a reflection of your inner reality. Whatever is going on out there is really coming from you. Very, very powerful. Storybook syndrome. So in my book I have a chapter called the Storybook Syndrome, which is what my work is based on. When you grew up, you learned who you are by what you were taught. And depending on how old you are, we were all taught different things, right? You also learned it from, like my grandmother was around during the Great Depression. She died at 94, wonderful person. So she always had a thing about money. And she was very comfortable, but she just wouldn't buy a cup of coffee. I bought her a cup of coffee or took her to Starbucks, and she could not get over that it was $5 or whatever it cost dollars to buy coffee. She couldn't believe it. So there's religion, it's the culture, politics, what country you've been born in. All of that forms your story, right? And then we become that story. And the question I always have for all of you is, what story have you believed in? What story are you teaching your children? And do you want to believe it? Because when I say your past does not define who you are right here and now or your future, it doesn't. You can create a whole new story. So in spiritual psychology, we say when you're in a relationship that isn't so hot, the question is, why did you attract that relationship? It's probably because you feel that you're unworthy and deserving, so I'm going to attract somebody that's going to treat me horribly, or whatever they're doing. And that is your story. So the minute you change your story and you clean yourself up, you're going to attract the right person. A common thing I see is called chasing love. which is where you don't feel loving and worthy. Has anyone ever chased love, or are you afraid to tell me? Okay. Okay, good topic. I don't need this. This is just not going to work today. So chasing love is where we grow up thinking we're unworthy and deserving. Right? I could have bought into this with my health. You know, I'm going to fall apart because they say if something's wrong with you, you should just be miserable and die and do nothing. So I couldn't believe that. That was someone else's story. Chasing love is you grow up thinking you're not good enough. I've had clients tell me that their parents would, I have some brutal stories, but I'm not going to go there, that their parents would constantly say, you're stupid. You're not good enough. Don't be yourself because then somebody won't like you. I have parents that have tried to murder their children. I write about some of it in my book. So what do? They go and they attract how they feel about themselves. Awful. They're never going to be loved by this person because they don't love themselves, so how are they going to be loved? And then what they do is because they're so scared that the person's going to leave because they want to be loved, they chase. You can call it serial dating too if you want. They chase for the love. They keep chasing and chasing and chasing. And finally, if they happen to be with a healthy person, which typically doesn't happen, they chase that person away too, because a healthy person is going to say, I don't think so. So until they clean themselves up and learn to forgive themselves for buying into the misbelief that they're anything other than love, what their parents did had nothing to do with them or whatever, if they're adopted or whatever the story is, this pattern continues. This is how it works with abuse. Verbal and physical abuse. Verbal is just as bad as physical. Wrong, wrong. If anyone tells you that you're not good enough, then you got a problem. Because it's just, I hate abuse. I don't think it's acceptable. So your storybook syndrome has caused you to chase love.